23 years ago, I was a terrified 12-year-old girl shivering outside a Paris airport terminal, abandoned by my mother and sister, because I was quote-unquote ruining their vacation. I survived only because a mysterious European stranger found me crying on a bench and told me to trust him. Fast forward to tonight. My family just tried to steal my luxury acquisition firm in front of 300 federal judges and elite investors at a charity gala in Atlanta. They thought they had the perfect legal trap. They had no idea the same man who saved my life 2 decades ago was standing right outside the ballroom doors, holding the FBI on line 1, and the financial ruin of my entire family in his briefcase. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes and the soft murmur of Atlanta society filled the grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel. It was my 35th birthday and the 5-year anniversary of the firm I built from the ground up. I stood at the clear acrylic podium adjusting the microphone, looking out at a sea of silk gowns and tailored tuxedos. I was halfway through my keynote speech about our new philanthropic initiative when the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the room swung wide open. My older sister Jasmine marched down the center aisle. She wore a striking emerald green gown that caught the flash of the event photographer's cameras. She did not look like a woman crashing a corporate event. She looked like a predator who thought she had finally cornered her prey. Jasmine climbed the short steps to the stage without breaking her perfectly glossed smile. She bypassed the event coordinator, waved off the security guard who stepped forward, and walked straight up to my podium. The room fell into a confused, dead silence. Jasmine slapped a thick, heavy manila folder directly over my speech notes. She leaned into the microphone so her voice echoed through the massive room. "Happy 35th birthday, Naomi. I am so glad we could all be here tonight to celebrate you stepping down and handing the family business back to its rightful owner, me." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled her delusion and sent her home with nothing but a federal indictment, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. If you have ever had a toxic family member try to claim credit for your hard work and success, hit that like button and subscribe. You are going to love how this ends. I looked down at the manila folder resting on the podium. The top document was a power of attorney and a corporate restructuring mandate. It had official-looking embossed seals and thick blue ink signatures. It was designed to look incredibly intimidating to anyone who did not understand corporate law. I did not flinch. I did not step back from the podium. Growing up as the scapegoat in a family of narcissists teaches you one vital survival skill. You never show them fear because fear is their oxygen. I looked at Jasmine. Her chest was rising and falling quickly. She was thriving on the adrenaline of the public spectacle. She thought the presence of hundreds of my peers and investors would force me into compliance. She thought I would fold simply to avoid a public scandal. That was always her signature move. Create a scene so uncomfortable that the victim gives in just to make the embarrassment stop. But I was not the terrified 12-year-old girl she left behind anymore. I was a chief executive officer. I slowly opened the folder, making sure every single person in the front row could see how unbothered I was. The paper felt thick and expensive. I scanned the first page. According to these documents, my mother Patricia had legally transferred her supposed 51% controlling interest in my company directly to Jasmine and her husband DeAndre. They had even drafted a press release announcing my immediate resignation due to severe mental exhaustion. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. Jasmine leaned closer to me, lowering her voice to a venomous whisper that the microphone barely caught. "Sign the acknowledgement page, Naomi. Do it now and we will let you keep your little corner office as a consultant. Make a scene and DeAndre is waiting in the wings with the board members to vote you out completely. Mom is in the front row. Do not break her heart on your birthday." I shifted my gaze to the front table. Right on cue, my mother Patricia stood up. She was wearing her finest pearls and dabbing the corners of her eyes with a lace handkerchief, performing her favorite role for the wealthy donors sitting beside her. The heartbroken but supportive mother. For years, she had spun a web of lies to Atlanta high society, claiming my firm was a family venture that she had generously funded to give her youngest daughter a chance at success. The truth was, I started this company in a cramped studio apartment, eating instant noodles while Patricia and Jasmine spent their days at the country club. Patricia had never invested a single dime in my vision. She only started showing up to my corporate events when the revenue crossed the 8-figure mark, so she could take the credit in front of her friends. I looked back at the forged documents. The signatures were perfect forgeries of my own legal team. DeAndre must have paid a fortune to get these drawn up. I felt a slow, cold smile spread across my face. I reached up and adjusted the microphone, pulling it a few inches closer to my mouth. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The silence in the ballroom was so absolute that you could hear a pin drop. "A hostile takeover at a charity gala," I said, my voice steady and echoing across the crystal chandeliers. "Bold move, Jasmine. But tell me, did DeAndre actually review these documents before you brought them to a room full of federal judges and my corporate attorneys?" Jasmine narrowed her eyes, her confident smile faltering for a fraction of a second. She thought I was bluffing. She thought I was trying to save face in front of the crowd. I looked over at the sound engineer standing by the mixing board and gave him a sharp nod. "Cut the music," I commanded. The faint classical background music that had been playing abruptly stopped, leaving nothing but the heavy tension in the air. The real game was just beginning. I flipped to the second page of the packet, letting the heavy stock paper rustle into the microphone. They really went all out to make this look authentic. Jasmine stood there with her hands on her hips, looking incredibly smug. She expected me to crumble. She expected me to burst into tears and run off the stage just like I did when we were kids, and she would steal my science fair projects to claim as her own. "This is a durable power of attorney," I said, projecting my voice so it reached every corner of the grand ballroom. "Fascinating choice, Jasmine. And it claims to transfer Mom's 51% controlling interest to you and DeAndre. Let me ask you a very simple question. How can someone transfer equity in a company they do not own?" Jasmine let out a sharp, patronizing laugh that echoed in the quiet room. "Oh, Naomi, stop embarrassing yourself. Everyone in this room knows Mom provided the $2 million seed capital to get your little firm off the ground. It is her company. We are just formalizing the paperwork to protect the assets since you are clearly unstable." I looked out at the audience. Some of the investors were whispering to each other. This lie had been circulating in our social circle for 5 solid years. Patricia had spent countless afternoons at the Piedmont Driving Club sipping mimosas and telling anyone who would listen that she was my angel investor. She told the wealthy country club members that she mortgaged her own future to give her struggling youngest daughter a chance in the cutthroat corporate world. She told the board of the local hospital that she personally mentored me through my first commercial real estate deal. I turned my attention to Patricia, who was still putting on her tearful performance in the front row. "Seed capital," I repeated. "That is an interesting term for you to use, Mom, because 5 years ago I was living in a 400-square-foot studio apartment. I was eating instant ramen noodles and working 18-hour days to secure my first commercial real estate acquisition. I worked nights as a bartender just to pay for my real estate license while you bought Jasmine her third luxury sport utility vehicle. I actually slept in my car for 2 weeks when my apartment lease ran out, just so I could afford the legal fees to incorporate my business. When I came to you and begged for a $10,000 loan to cover my closing costs, you looked me in the eye and told me I was delusional. You said African American women do not build luxury real estate empires and that I should just go get a stable job managing a retail store." Patricia gasped, pressing a hand to her pearl necklace. "Naomi, how can you lie like this in front of our friends? I gave you everything. I sacrificed so much for you. You know I sold your grandmother's jewelry to help you. You gave me nothing," I replied, my voice remaining perfectly calm and measured. "I built this firm from nothing. I secured the first round of funding on my own. I negotiated the commercial acquisitions on my own. You did not even know the name of my company until you saw my face on the cover of the Atlanta Business Chronicle. You were never my angel investor, Patricia. You were the hurdle I had to jump over to survive. Jasmine slammed her hand down on the acrylic podium. Shut up, Naomi. The paperwork is legally binding. It was notarized this morning. DeAndre made sure the transfer of assets was completely airtight. You have breached your fiduciary duty by mishandling the company funds, and Mom has every right to seize control to protect her investment. I looked down at the document again and let out a genuine loud laugh. Airtight. Really? Because I am looking at the notary stamp right now. It belongs to a man named Gregory who works at the bank branch down the street from DeAndre's office. But there is a glaring legal problem here, Jasmine. Jasmine narrowed her eyes, her confident smile faltering for the very first time. There is no problem. It is fully executed. We filed it today. Actually, there is a massive problem, I said, tapping the heavy paper. A durable power of attorney, transferring corporate equity, requires a medallion signature guarantee if the shares are held in a specific type of trust, which they are not. More importantly, this document cites a non-existent operating agreement. It claims Patricia is the managing member of a Delaware limited liability company. My firm is incorporated in Nevada as a C corporation. You did not even get the corporate structure right. Let me explain basic corporate law to you, Jasmine. When you attempt a fraudulent conveyance of corporate assets, you commit tortious interference. You and DeAndre forged documents claiming Mom was the primary shareholder and indemnified yourselves against corporate losses. But you completely ignored the bylaws of corporate governance. Not only does this piece of paper carry zero legal weight, but handing it to me in front of federal judges and my general counsel constitutes documented evidence of attempted corporate fraud. The murmurs in the crowd grew much louder. Several of the corporate lawyers sitting at the front tables began to chuckle and shake their heads. Jasmine's face flushed a deep shade of crimson. She looked back at DeAndre, who was suddenly shifting his weight and looking very uncomfortable standing near the entrance doors. You are trying to steal a company using a boilerplate legal template you probably downloaded off the internet. I continued, my voice slicing through the tension like a blade. You claim Mom owns 51%. But if you had ever actually seen my capitalization table, you would know that I own exactly 49% of this firm. The other 51% is held by a private European holding company. Mom does not own a single share. She never has, and she never will. Patricia stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the expensive marble floor. That is enough, Naomi. You are clearly having a mental breakdown. We are taking you home right now before you do any more damage to the family name. The family name, I echoed, staring directly into her panicked eyes. The same family name you only started caring about when my net worth crossed 8 figures. You lied to all these people, Patricia. You let them believe you were the mastermind behind my success because your fragile ego could not stand the thought of the daughter you neglected outshining the golden child you spoiled. Jasmine pointed a manicured finger right at my face, her composure completely shattering. You are just stalling because you know you are finished. DeAndre has the corporate bank records. He has the proof that you have been mismanaging the company accounts. We are freezing your access tonight and firing your entire executive team in the morning. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the podium. I was staring down a sister who had bullied me my entire life, and a mother who had enabled every single second of her cruelty. They thought their sheer audacity would force me to back down. They thought the threat of a public spectacle would make me surrender my life's work just to keep the peace. Freezing my access, I said softly, making sure the microphone caught the dark amusement in my tone. You really should have hired a forensic accountant before you planned a hostile takeover at a charity gala. Because if you had looked closely at the corporate accounts, you would have realized something very important about the supposed 51% you are trying so desperately to steal. I paused, letting the heavy weight of my words hang in the silent ballroom. The trap was perfectly set, and they had walked right into it without checking for a pulse. I was about to drop a financial bomb that would obliterate their entire reality and expose them for exactly who they were. Patricia moved closer to the podium. She placed her perfectly manicured hand over mine. She looked out at the audience with wide, sorrowful eyes. Her voice trembled just enough to sound genuine to anyone who did not know her. "Naomi, baby, please do not make a scene in front of the board," she pleaded softly. "You have been so stressed lately. We are all so worried about you. Just let your sister and DeAndre handle things now. It is for your own mental health, darling. We just want you to rest." I stared at her hand resting on top of mine. The sheer manipulation of it was breathtaking. This was the classic narcissistic playbook in action. When they cannot control you behind closed doors, they try to discredit your sanity in public. They wrap their venom in maternal concern so that if you react with justified anger, you look like the unstable one. But I was not going to give her the reaction she desperately wanted. I slowly pulled my hand out from under hers. I took a step back so she was forced to stand fully in the glare of the stage lights without me as a shield. "My mental health?" I asked, projecting my voice so the entire room could hear. "That is a brilliant angle, Mom. Tell everyone I am crazy so they ignore the fact that you and Jasmine are attempting corporate theft. But my mental health is perfectly fine. My financial foresight, on the other hand, is sharper than ever." DeAndre finally stepped out from the shadows near the ballroom doors. He realized his wife and mother-in-law were losing control of the narrative. He strode down the center aisle, adjusting his expensive suit jacket, trying to project an air of masculine authority. He climbed the stairs to the stage and stood directly next to Jasmine, crossing his arms over his chest. "Let us keep this professional," Naomi. DeAndre said, his baritone voice echoing through the silent room. "We did not want to do this publicly, but you forced our hand. Patricia signed her 51% over to us this morning. The paperwork is filed. You lost. Do the graceful thing and pack up your office." I looked at DeAndre and let out a soft, genuine laugh. "Oh, DeAndre," I replied, shaking my head. "You really should have read the fine print before you paid that fake notary. Do you want to know what you actually signed today? Do you want to know what Mom just graciously handed over to you and Jasmine?" Jasmine snatched the microphone. "We own the majority shares," she snapped. "We own your company. You own nothing," I stated, my voice dropping to a cold, absolute register. 6 months ago, I saw this coming. I noticed the discrepancies in the charity fund, and I knew it was only a matter of time before you tried to stage a coup. So I legally restructured my entire holding firm. I created a new parent company and transferred all of the profitable assets, all of the real estate portfolios, and all of the liquid capital into that new entity. I paused, watching the color begin to drain from DeAndre's face. He was a finance guy. He was starting to realize exactly what I was saying. "The company that Mom claims to own 51% of," I continued, pointing to the forged document on the podium, "is now nothing but a hollow shell. It holds zero assets. But do you know what it does hold, Jasmine? It holds $4 million in outstanding corporate debt that I intentionally left behind during the restructuring. By signing those fraudulent documents this morning and claiming majority ownership, you did not steal my empire. You just assumed full legal liability for $4 million in toxic debt." The ballroom erupted. Investors gasped. The federal judges at the front table began whispering furiously to one another. Jasmine stumbled back a step, her designer heels catching on the stage carpet. She looked at DeAndre with wild, terrified eyes. "DeAndre, what is she talking about?" Jasmine demanded, her voice pitching up into a hysterical screech. "Tell her she is lying. Tell them we own the company." DeAndre did not answer her. He was staring at me, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked in his cheek. He knew I was not lying. He knew he had walked his family right into a financial slaughterhouse because he was too arrogant to do basic due diligence. Patricia grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Stop this right now," she hissed, dropping the sweet mother act completely. Her face was twisted with rage. "You fix this, Naomi. You fix this right now, or so help me God, I will destroy you." I looked down at her hand gripping my arm. Then I looked her dead in the eye. You cannot destroy me, Patricia, I said, my voice dangerously low. I survived you abandoning me at Charles de Gaulle Airport when I was 12 years old. I survived you leaving me to freeze in a foreign country because I was ruining your vacation. If I can survive that, I can certainly survive you throwing a tantrum at a charity gala. Patricia froze. Her hand went limp and fell away from my arm. The mention of the Paris airport was a ghost she never expected to face in a room full of her wealthy friends. She stumbled backward, bumping into Jasmine. That was a misunderstanding, Patricia stammered, her voice shaking as she looked out at the audience, who were now staring at her in absolute horror. We thought you were with the chaperone. We called the embassy the next day. We did everything we could. You called the embassy 7 hours later. I shot back, my voice ringing with decades of suppressed anger. And you only called because the FBI contacted you. You did not care that I was gone until the federal government threatened you with international child abandonment, and the only reason they found me was because a Spanish diplomat saw a 12-year-old girl shivering outside Terminal 2. DeAndre wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. He stepped forward, trying to salvage whatever was left of his dignity. That is ancient history, Naomi, he deflected, waving his hand dismissively. We are talking about the business right now. We own the controlling interest, and we will take you to court. I smiled. It was a cold, calculating smile that promised nothing but total annihilation. You cannot take me to court, DeAndre, I said softly, because you are going to be a little too busy dealing with the guests I invited to the gala tonight. I looked past them toward the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom. I raised my hand and gave a sharp, clear signal to the security team standing by the entrance. The real trap had just snapped shut, and there was no way out for any of them. The security team stationed at the back of the ballroom did not step forward to escort me off the stage. Instead, the head of security, a retired police captain I had personally hired 3 years ago, gave me a single sharp nod. He reached out and pulled the heavy mahogany double doors shut, locking them with a loud echoing click that reverberated through the silent room. 2 other guards stepped in front of the side exits, crossing their arms. Nobody was getting out. Jasmine spun around, her eyes darting toward the locked doors. The color completely drained from her face as the reality of the situation began to set in. But DeAndre was not ready to surrender. He was a man who had spent his entire life bullying his way through corporate boardrooms and relying on his physical presence to intimidate anyone who dared to question his authority. He was 6'3", a former college athlete, and he was used to women backing down when he raised his voice. He abandoned all pretense of professionalism. He marched directly toward the acrylic podium, closing the distance between us, until he was standing completely in my personal space. He planted his large hands flat on the transparent surface of the podium, looming over me. His chest heaved, and I could smell the sharp metallic scent of nervous sweat cutting through his expensive cologne. He leaned his face down so he was mere inches from mine, trying to force me to step backward. He did not use the microphone. Instead, his voice boomed across the silent ballroom, raw and aggressive. You think some fake story about a shell company and a security guard locking the doors is going to save you? Come on, Naomi. We have the majority shares. Patricia signed her 51% over to us this morning. You lost. Pack up. The crowd gasped. Several people in the front rows physically recoiled from the sheer aggression radiating off him. One of the federal judges sitting at the VIP table reached into his jacket pocket, likely pulling out his phone to call for law enforcement. DeAndre was unraveling in real time, completely blind to how unhinged he looked to the very investors he was trying to steal. I did not step back. I did not break eye contact. I held my ground and stared up into his furious eyes, letting a long, agonizing silence stretch between us. Bullies like DeAndre operate on a very simple algorithm. They apply pressure and they expect you to fold. When you do not fold, their entire system short-circuits. You are sweating, DeAndre. I said, my voice perfectly level and calm. I leaned a fraction of an inch closer to him, flipping the dynamic. You are sweating because you know I am telling the truth. You know you did not do a forensic audit of Mom's supposed shares before you drew up those forged documents, and now you are standing in front of 300 of the most powerful people in Atlanta, realizing that you just assumed $4 million of toxic corporate debt. Shut up, he hissed, his fingers gripping the edges of the podium so tightly his knuckles turned white. You are lying. You are trying to cause a panic. I am the new chief executive officer of this firm, and I am ordering you off this stage right now. I smiled. It was a cold, detached expression that made him flinch. You are not a chief executive officer, DeAndre. You are a parasite who married into a family that loves the illusion of wealth more than actual hard work. You ran your last two tech startups into the ground. You burned through $3 million of venture capital in less than 18 months. Did you really think I would not run a background check on my own brother-in-law? Jasmine stepped forward, grabbing DeAndre by the arm. Naomi, stop it, she pleaded, her voice trembling with panic. Just sign the papers and let us go. Stop humiliating him. I am not humiliating him, Jasmine, I replied, never taking my eyes off DeAndre. He is doing a fantastic job of that, all by himself. But since we are airing out the family laundry tonight, let us talk about why you are so desperate to steal my company. Because it is not just about greed, is it, DeAndre? It is about survival. DeAndre's jaw clenched. A muscle ticked frantically in his cheek. Do not say another word, Naomi, he growled, leaning even closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I am warning you, step away from the microphone and walk out of here before I make you regret it. I reached out and tapped the microphone, ensuring it was perfectly positioned to pick up my next words. You owe $750,000 to an offshore sports betting syndicate, I announced, my voice ringing crystal clear across the ballroom. You have been secretly leveraging Jasmine's trust fund to pay off the interest, but the principal just keeps growing. And those creditors do not send polite letters from lawyers when you miss a payment. They send men who break things. That is why you forged these documents today. You needed to liquidate my company's assets by Friday to save your own skin. A collective murmur of shock rippled through the audience. Jasmine let out a sharp, strangled cry and let go of DeAndre's arms, staring at him in absolute horror. What is she talking about? DeAndre? Jasmine demanded, her voice rising in pitch. What gambling debt? You told me the trust fund money was going into a high-yield real estate portfolio. DeAndre ignored his wife. His eyes were fixed on me, filled with a toxic mixture of pure hatred and absolute panic. He raised his right hand, pointing a trembling finger directly at my face. You arrogant little brat! He sneered, his booming voice cracking under the pressure. I will tie you up in litigation for the next 2 decades. I will drain every single cent you have in legal fees until you are back to sleeping in your car. You think you are so smart, but you are nothing without this company. We own the controlling interest. The paperwork is legally binding. You are finished. He slammed his fist down on the acrylic podium, making the heavy manila folder jump. Several glasses clinked on the nearby tables from the vibration. It was a blatant display of physical intimidation designed to terrorize me into submission. He wanted me to shrink. He wanted me to show the crowd that I was intimidated by him. Instead, I picked up the forged power of attorney documents. I held them up perfectly under the bright stage lights for everyone to see. Then slowly and deliberately, I tore the thick paper straight down the middle. I tore it again and again, until the fraudulent legal documents were nothing but jagged pieces of trash in my hands. I dropped the shredded paper onto the floor, letting the pieces scatter across the stage right over DeAndre's expensive Italian leather shoes. I am finished, I asked, raising an eyebrow. I think you are confused about who is holding the cards tonight, DeAndre. Because while you were busy playing dress-up in a tailored suit and pretending to be a corporate titan, I was busy protecting my empire. I stepped out from behind the podium, completely eliminating the physical barrier between us. I stood toe-to-toe with him, refusing to let his size intimidate me. You wanted to play a high-stakes game with my life's work? I said, my voice icy and unwavering. You wanted to corner me in public and force me to hand over the keys to my kingdom, but you forgot the most important rule of business. Never try to execute a hostile takeover unless you know exactly who is sitting in the dark, waiting to protect the target. I turned my head and looked past him toward the locked mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom. The security captain caught my eye and nodded once more. He reached down and unclipped the heavy brass lock from the handles. He grabbed both doors and pulled them wide open. The true consequences of my family's actions had finally arrived. The heavy doors groaned as they swung open, revealing the brightly lit hallway outside the ballroom. Before the figures in the corridor could even step across the threshold, Jasmine panicked. She saw the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the lobby windows and realized I was not bluffing about having security lock them in. She grabbed the edge of the podium, her knuckles turning white. "You cannot do this, Naomi!" she shrieked, her voice echoing frantically. "We are the majority shareholders. We own 51% of this company, and you cannot legally hold us hostage." I looked at her terrified face and I laughed. It was not a chuckle, but a loud, sharp laugh that rang out right in her face. The sheer audacity of her clinging to that forged number while her entire world collapsed was almost comical. 51%, I asked, my voice dripping with absolute contempt. Just like the 100% guarantee you gave me at Charles de Gaulle Airport 23 years ago. Remember that, Jasmine? Remember when you told a 12-year-old me to wait by the oversized baggage claim because you had a surprise for me? Jasmine froze. The color drained completely from her lips. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. I took a step toward her, forcing her to look me in the eye. I remember it vividly. I continued my words, striking her like physical blows. You handed me my little pink backpack. You looked me right in the eyes and promised you would be right back with French pastries. You guaranteed it, 100%. And then you and Mom walked to a different terminal and boarded a flight to Milan without me. Patricia let out a loud, dramatic sob from the front row. She pressed both hands over her face, shaking her head violently. "Naomi, please," she wailed. "Do not do this. Not here. Not in front of everybody. It was a mistake. We thought you were with the student tour chaperone. We thought you were safe." I turned my glare to Patricia. "Do not insult my intelligence, Mom. And do not insult the intelligence of every single person in this room. There was no student tour chaperone. It was a family vacation. But the two of you scored last-minute VIP passes to a Fashion Week party in Milan, and you decided a 12-year-old girl was too much of a liability to bring along. So you dumped me at one of the busiest airports in the world like a piece of unwanted luggage." The ballroom was dead silent. You could feel the collective horror radiating from the guests. These were people who had children and grandchildren of their own. The idea of abandoning a child in a foreign country was incomprehensible to them. Patricia's carefully crafted image as the devoted, loving matriarch was burning to the ground right in front of her eyes. I waited by that carousel for 7 hours. I said, my voice steady, but carrying the weight of decades of unresolved pain. I was cold. I was hungry. I did not speak a word of French. I watched thousands of strangers walk past me while I clutched that pink backpack, praying my mother and sister had just gotten lost. I did not realize you had intentionally discarded me until the airport security guards found me crying on a bench. Patricia reached out her hand, trembling. "We called the embassy, Naomi. We called them the very next morning to find you. You called them because the FBI threatened you." I shot back, my tone merciless. "You did not call them out of love. You called them because a European diplomat found me outside Terminal 2 and escalated the situation to international authorities. The federal government informed you that if you did not return to Paris and claim your daughter, you would be arrested for child abandonment the second you set foot on American soil. You only came back for me to save yourselves from a prison cell." DeAndre was staring at Jasmine, his mouth slightly open. He had known me for 6 years, but he clearly had never heard this story. Jasmine had likely spun some sanitized version of my childhood, to him painting me as the difficult, rebellious sister, while she was the perfect golden child. Hearing the raw, ugly truth exposed her true nature even to her own husband. What does any of this have to do with the company? Jasmine deflected, her voice shrill and desperate. She was trying to pivot, trying to drag the conversation back to the forged documents scattered on the floor. That was 23 years ago. You cannot use childhood grievances to void a legal contract today. I shook my head slowly, marveling at her complete lack of a soul. It has everything to do with the company, Jasmine. Because the same breathtaking selfishness that allowed you to leave a child alone in Paris is the exact same selfishness that made you think you could walk into my gala and steal my life's work. You have always viewed me as collateral damage. You thought I was just an obstacle standing between you and the money you felt entitled to. I pointed down at the shredded power of attorney papers resting on DeAndre's shoes. You thought you could blindside me tonight because you still see me as that terrified 12-year-old girl waiting by the baggage claim. You thought I would be too scared of a public confrontation to fight back, but you forgot one crucial detail. I paused, letting the silence stretch for a long, dramatic moment. The girl you left in Paris died that day, I said softly, but with absolute finality. She realized that her own blood would rather throw her away than be mildly inconvenienced, so she stopped relying on her family and she started building armor. Every single business deal I closed, every single dollar I made, I did it knowing that the people who were supposed to protect me were the ones I had to protect myself against. Jasmine backed away from the podium, her confidence entirely shattered. She was looking around the room searching for a friendly face, but she found none. The wealthy elite of Atlanta were staring at her with undisguised disgust. Even the people Patricia had spent years charming were whispering fiercely among themselves, shaking their heads. "You are a monster," Naomi Jasmine whispered, her voice breaking. "You set this whole thing up just to humiliate us." "I did not forge those documents, Jasmine," I reminded her calmly. "I did not force you to crash my birthday gala. I did not force DeAndre to gamble away your trust fund. And I certainly did not force Mom to lie about funding my empire. You dug this grave with your own bare hands. All I did was stop paying for the shovel." At that exact moment, the heavy footsteps that had been waiting outside the open mahogany doors finally stepped across the threshold. The tension in the ballroom snapped like a tight wire as the figures stepped into the light. But before the figures could fully emerge from the shadows of the hallway, DeAndre let out a desperate, guttural shout. He stepped right in front of Jasmine, physically blocking her, as if he could shield them both from the consequences walking through those doors. He threw his hands up in the air, addressing the crowd, and completely dismissing the horrifying revelation about my childhood abandonment. "This is a distraction," DeAndre yelled, his voice cracking under the immense pressure. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "She is trying to distract you with a 20-year-old sob story because she knows she is legally cornered. This is a corporate matter. I do not care what happened at an airport when you were a kid, Naomi. We filed the paperwork with the state at 8 o'clock this morning. You are legally obligated to hand over the banking tokens and the corporate seals right now." He was sweating profusely. Large droplets rolled down his forehead and soaked into the collar of his expensive custom-tailored shirt. He was trapped in a room with 300 of the most influential people in the city, and his only remaining strategy was to double down on the delusion. He was trying to pivot back to business, because business was the only language he thought he could still manipulate. I looked at him dead in the eye. I did not raise my voice. I let the absolute certainty of his destruction carry my words. "You filed the paperwork at 8 o'clock this morning," I repeated slowly, making sure every single syllable landed with maximum impact. "And my attorneys filed a Chapter 7 bankruptcy petition for that specific corporate entity at 4:30 yesterday afternoon." DeAndre froze. His hand, suspended mid-air pointing at me, slowly dropped to his side. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "You own 51% of a shell company I bankrupted yesterday?" I stated, my voice echoing like a judge reading a final sentence. "When I restructured my assets 6 months ago, I intentionally left that original holding company open. I left it with the $4 million in toxic corporate debt and absolutely zero liquid assets. I knew Mom was too arrogant to read financial disclosures, and I knew you were too desperate to hire a forensic accountant. The ballroom was so quiet, you could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning vents. DeAndre was staring at me, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it almost looked like physical pain. "Do you understand what you did this morning, DeAndre?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "By forging those documents and submitting them to the state registry, you did not just steal a worthless company. You officially registered yourself as the managing member and primary shareholder of an entity undergoing active bankruptcy liquidation. You signed an indemnification clause, taking full personal responsibility for its liabilities. You just committed financial suicide." Jasmine grabbed DeAndre by the shoulder, spinning him around to face her. "What does she mean?" Jasmine shrieked, her carefully maintained image completely disintegrating. "DeAndre, tell me she is lying. You said this was foolproof. You said the company was worth $40 million and we just had to file the transfer." DeAndre could not look at her. He was staring at the shredded pieces of the forged power of attorney resting on his shoes. He was a man who owed nearly $1 million to violent offshore bookies, and he had just legally attached his name to another $4 million of unpayable corporate debt. His breathing became shallow and erratic. "We can withdraw it." DeAndre stammered, his voice barely a whisper. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "We can call the state registry. We can say it was a clerical error. We will tear up the paperwork." "You cannot withdraw a fraudulent filing that has already been flagged by the Internal Revenue Service," I replied coldly. "The moment you submitted those forged signatures, you committed wire fraud and corporate espionage. The state registry automatically notified my legal team. The trap was sprung the second you walked into this building." Patricia pushed past Jasmine, her face pale and streaked with ruined mascara. She was desperately trying to pivot back to playing the victim. She realized the sinking ship was taking her down with it, and she was ready to throw anyone overboard to save herself. I did not know Patricia cried, turning to the audience and holding her hands up in surrender. I did not know what they were doing. DeAndre told me it was just standard paperwork to protect the family investment. I did not understand what I was signing. I am just a mother trying to help her children. They manipulated me. I reached under the acrylic podium and pulled out a second manila folder. This one was much thicker than the forgery Jasmine had slammed down earlier. I dropped it onto the transparent surface with a heavy thud. "Do not try to play the innocent victim, Mom," I said, my voice slicing through her pathetic performance. "Because this folder does not contain bankruptcy filings. This folder contains the forensic accounting of the company charity fund over the last 3 years." Jasmine stopped screaming at DeAndre and whipped her head around to look at me. The sheer panic in her eyes was intoxicating to witness. I opened the folder. "Let us talk about where the charity money actually went," I announced. "Because the generous donations from the people in this room were supposed to go toward building affordable housing in underserved communities. But instead, I found a trail of wire transfers moving hundreds of thousands of dollars into private accounts controlled by you, Patricia." Patricia took a step back, shaking her head violently. "No," she whispered. "That is a lie. It is all meticulously documented." I continued tapping the stack of bank statements. "You used the corporate charity fund to pay off DeAndre's gambling debts so his bookies would not break his legs. You used it to lease Jasmine's luxury sport utility vehicles. You even used it to fund your extravagant vacations to Europe. You stole from the charity you were parading around tonight." The reaction from the audience was immediate and explosive. The investors and philanthropists who had spent years listening to Patricia brag at the country club were now glaring at her with absolute disgust. Several people stood up from their tables, grabbing their coats and whispering angrily to one another. Patricia had not just embarrassed them, she had defrauded them. Her social standing, the only thing she truly cared about in this world, was being incinerated right in front of her. Jasmine lunged forward. She threw herself across the podium, reaching desperately for the folder containing the bank statements. She was screaming incoherently, her perfectly styled hair falling into her face. "Give me those!" she shrieked, her fingernails scraping against the acrylic. "You forged these. You are trying to frame us." She managed to grab a handful of the papers, pulling them toward her chest like a shield. She looked wild, entirely stripped of her fake aristocratic grace. But it did not matter. I had digital copies sent to every single board member and investor 10 minutes before I walked on stage. It was over. The dominoes had fallen exactly as I planned. The narcissistic facade had shattered, revealing the greedy, desperate parasites hiding underneath. The alliance between my mother, my sister, and my brother-in-law was fracturing into pieces as they realized they were all going down. And that was when the heavy footsteps in the hallway finally entered the ballroom. The figures who had been waiting patiently just beyond the threshold stepped fully into the bright light of the crystal chandeliers. They were not hotel security. They were not event coordinators. They were 4 men and 2 women, wearing dark suits with gold badges clipped to their belts. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had arrived. The 6 agents moved in perfect synchronization down the center aisle of the ballroom. Their dark suits stood out in stark contrast to the glittering evening gowns and tuxedos of my guests. The murmurs that had been building in the room instantly died. You could hear the soft squeak of the agents' rubber-soled shoes against the polished marble floor. Jasmine saw the gold badges and a sudden twisted smile spread across her face. She was so completely detached from reality that she actually believed the authorities were there to save her. She stepped out from behind DeAndre and pointed a manicured finger directly at my chest. "It is about time you got here," Jasmine shouted, her voice echoing in the silent room. "Arrest her immediately. She is committing corporate fraud. She just admitted to bankrupting our company and stealing our assets. We have the legal paperwork proving we are the majority owners." The lead agent, a tall woman with steel gray hair and a completely unreadable expression, did not even look at Jasmine. She walked straight up to the edge of the stage and stopped. She looked at the shredded pieces of the forged power of attorney resting on the floor, and then she looked up at me. "Naomi," she said, her voice professional and calm. "Do you have the documents we discussed?" I nodded and picked up the 2 manila folders from the acrylic podium. The first one contained the clean digital copies of the forged transfer documents they had filed with the state that morning. The second contained the forensic accounting of the charity fund embezzlement. I walked to the edge of the stage and handed them down to her. "Everything is there," I said loud enough for the entire room to hear. The time-stamped filings from the state registry proving fraudulent conveyance, and the bank routing numbers tracing the stolen charity funds directly to offshore accounts and private luxury car dealerships. Jasmine dropped her hand. Her twisted smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer incomprehension. "What are you doing?" she demanded, looking between me and the lead agent. "She is the one stealing from us. We own 51% of this firm." I turned back to face my sister and my brother-in-law. The sheer surgical precision of the trap I had laid for them was finally coming into full view, and I wanted every single business leader in this room to understand exactly what happens when you try to cross me. "You do not own a firm." "Jasmine," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the microphone, "let me break down the financial reality of your situation so there is absolutely no confusion before you leave this building in handcuffs. 6 months ago, I realized Mom was getting careless with her lies. I noticed DeAndre asking entirely too many questions about my liquid assets at family dinners. I knew you were planning a hostile takeover, so I executed a corporate restructuring maneuver known as a drop-down transaction." The ballroom erupted in a low hum of whispers. The federal judges and corporate attorneys in the audience immediately recognized the term. They knew exactly how ruthless and brilliant a properly executed drop-down transaction could be. "I created a brand new holding company incorporated in Delaware," I explained, pacing slowly across the stage. "I transferred all of the intellectual property, the vendor contracts, the real estate portfolios, and the liquid capital from the original Nevada company into the new Delaware entity. I did it entirely legally, paying all necessary capital gains taxes and filing every disclosure with the Securities and Exchange Commission. DeAndre was breathing so heavily, his chest heaved with every breath. He was a finance guy, and the absolute horror of his mistake was finally connecting in his brain. The original Nevada company, the one Mom falsely claimed to own 51% of, was left open and active, I continued. But I stripped it of every single asset. The only thing left inside that corporate vehicle was a $4 million balloon payment due to a commercial lender. It was a debt I intentionally left behind, knowing it was tied solely to that specific entity. A senior partner at a prestigious Atlanta law firm sitting at the VIP table actually let out a loud bark of laughter. He could not contain his amusement at the sheer scale of DeAndre's incompetence. "You saw an outdated tax return from 2 years ago, DeAndre," I said, looking right at him. "You saw a company valued at $40 million and you got greedy. You were so desperate to pay off your offshore bookies that you did not even bother to pull a current schedule of assets. You did not check the employer identification numbers. You just forged a document claiming Mom was transferring her phantom shares to you." "We are protected," DeAndre stammered, taking a step backward. His voice was trembling so violently he could barely form the words. "We are protected by the corporate veil. It is a limited liability company. We are not personally responsible for corporate debt." "Under normal circumstances, you would be right," I agreed, nodding slowly. "But you were not operating under normal circumstances. You were operating under extreme panic. When you filed that forged power of attorney with the state registry this morning, you bypassed standard corporate governance. To force the transfer through without my signature, you signed a personal indemnification clause. You officially guaranteed the assets of the company." I paused, letting the absolute finality of my next words sink into his bones. "By trying to steal my empire, you pierced your own corporate veil, DeAndre. You took a $4 million commercial loan and turned it into a personal debt. The bank is going to foreclose on your house, your cars, and every single penny in Jasmine's trust fund by the end of the week. You did not just bankrupt yourself. You financially incinerated your entire future." Jasmine let out a sound that was half scream and half sob. She turned on DeAndre, her fists clenched. "You told me it was a gold mine," she shrieked, hitting him squarely in the chest. "You told me we were going to be multi-millionaires today. You stupid, arrogant fool. You lost everything. You lost my trust fund." DeAndre did not even try to defend himself. He just stood there staring blankly at the shredded pieces of paper on the floor. His entire identity as a wealthy, successful businessman had just been publicly executed. Patricia was hyperventilating in the front row. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and pleading. "Naomi, please," she gasped, clutching her pearl necklace. "You have to undo this. You have to tell the bank it was a mistake. I am your mother. You cannot let them take our homes. You stopped being my mother the day you left me at Charles de Gaulle Airport." I replied, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "You made a choice that day, Patricia. You chose your own comfort over my safety. And today, you made another choice. You chose to participate in a fraudulent scheme to steal everything I have built simply because your ego could not handle my success." I looked out at the audience. The 300 guests who had once attended Patricia's lavish country club luncheons were now staring at her with cold, unforgiving eyes. They saw her exactly for what she was, a parasite who tried to eat her own young. "There is no undoing this, Mom," I said, stepping away from the podium. "The paperwork is filed. The bankruptcy is active. The federal agents are standing right here with the evidence of your charity fraud. The trap was set the moment you decided to treat my life like an automatic teller machine, and you all walked right into it with your eyes wide open." The lead FBI agent stepped onto the first stair leading up to the stage. She signaled to the other agents, who immediately moved in, surrounding DeAndre and Jasmine. The reality of the situation was no longer a threat. It was happening right now in front of the entire city. The metallic click of handcuffs echoing across the grand ballroom was the sound that finally broke Patricia. Two federal agents had DeAndre turned around with his hands secured behind his back. Another agent was holding Jasmine by the arm, reading her Miranda rights, while my sister thrashed and sobbed, ruining her expensive silk gown. Patricia stood frozen in the front row, watching her golden child being treated like a common criminal. Then she slowly turned her head and looked up at me, standing behind the acrylic podium. The tearful, desperate mother, who had just been begging for my help, vanished completely. The transition was instant and terrifying. In her place stood the monster I had grown up with. The mask did not just slip. It shattered into a million jagged pieces right in front of the wealthiest and most influential people in Atlanta. She marched up the short flight of stairs to the stage. Her posture was completely different now. She was no longer shrinking or pleading. Her shoulders were thrown back. Her hands were curled into tight fists, and her face was contorted into a mask of pure, venomous rage. She stopped 2 feet away from me. "You ungrateful little brat!" Patricia hissed, her voice vibrating with a dark, heavy malice. She did not care that the microphone was picking up every single syllable and broadcasting it to the silent room. "You think you are so smart. You think you are untouchable because you have some money now." I did not step back. I did not speak. I employed the only defense mechanism that truly works against a narcissist experiencing a total loss of control. I became a gray rock. I stood completely still, my face devoid of any emotion, simply letting her words hang in the air. When you refuse to give a narcissist the emotional reaction they are desperately trying to provoke, they will inevitably escalate until they destroy themselves. "I gave you life," Patricia screamed, the sound tearing through her throat. She pointed a trembling finger right between my eyes. "You owe me everything. You would be nothing without my name. You would be a nobody working a minimum wage job if I had not allowed you to use the connections I built in this city." The absolute delusion of her statement hung over the ballroom. I looked out at the audience. The 300 guests were staring at her in stunned silence. These were people who respected hard work and self-made success. They knew exactly how much I had sacrificed to build my firm. Watching Patricia try to claim ownership of my entire existence simply because she gave birth to me was repulsive to them. "You were always a difficult child," she continued, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "You were always jealous of Jasmine. You hated that she was beautiful and popular. You hated that she married a successful man, so you spent your entire life plotting to ruin her. You set up this entire company just to trap us. You are evil, Naomi. You are a cold, heartless sociopath, and I wish to God I had left you in Paris permanently." A collective gasp swept through the front tables. The president of the Piedmont Driving Club, a woman Patricia had spent the last 5 years desperately trying to impress, physically recoiled and covered her mouth with her hand. Another prominent socialite sitting nearby shook her head in absolute disgust and turned her chair slightly away from the stage. Patricia did not notice. She was too far gone, consumed by the narcissistic rage that takes over when their false reality is forcefully dismantled. She paced back and forth across the stage, her expensive pearl necklace bouncing against her chest. "I clothed you!" she yelled, listing her basic legal obligations as a parent as if they were monumental acts of charity. "I fed you. I kept a roof over your head when you were an ungrateful teenager who did nothing but study and ignore your family. I am the reason these people are even sitting in this room tonight. They came for me. They came because of the family name I built." I looked at the federal judges, the corporate attorneys, and the venture capitalists sitting at the tables. None of them came for Patricia. Most of them had only tolerated her presence because she happened to be my mother. But tonight, they were getting a front-row seat to the reality I had lived with for 35 years. She stopped pacing and lunged toward the podium, slamming both hands flat against the clear acrylic. She leaned so far forward I could feel the heat of her breath. "You are going to call those agents off," she commanded, her voice dropping to a harsh guttural whisper that the microphone amplified perfectly. "You are going to tell them it is a misunderstanding. You are going to fix DeAndre's bankruptcy. Because if you do not, I will make sure you are ruined in this city." I will tell everyone the truth about you. I will tell them you are a fraud. I finally broke my silence. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the podium, mirroring her physical space, but projecting absolute calm. Tell them, Mom, I said softly. Go ahead. Tell the room. Patricia blinked, clearly confused by my lack of fear. Turn around and tell them, I instructed, gesturing casually toward the audience. Tell the hospital board directors how you stole from a charity fund meant for affordable housing to pay for your trips to Europe. Tell the federal judges how you helped forge a power of attorney to steal a company you never invested a single dime in. Tell the investors how you abandoned your youngest daughter in a foreign country to attend a fashion party. I am sure they are dying to hear your version of the truth. Patricia slowly turned her head and looked out at the ballroom. For the first time since she had marched onto the stage, the thick fog of her rage began to clear just enough for her to process her surroundings. She saw the faces of the Atlanta elite staring back at her. There was no sympathy in their eyes. There was no understanding. There was only raw, unfiltered contempt. She saw her wealthy friends whispering to each other, their expressions tight with judgment. She saw the people she had spent decades brown-nosing and manipulating looking at her as if she were a disease. The social standing she had worshipped her entire life, the reputation she had sacrificed her own daughter to maintain, was reduced to ashes in less than 5 minutes. No, she whispered, taking a trembling step back from the podium. No, you do not understand. She is lying to you. But nobody was listening to her anymore. The spell was broken. She had shown them the monster behind the manicured smile, and there was no way to put the mask back on. By trying to publicly humiliate me, she had executed her own social suicide. I watched her shoulders slump. The terrifying, venomous predator deflated, turning into a small, pathetic woman standing alone on a brightly lit stage. She looked desperately toward Jasmine, but Jasmine was already being escorted toward the side exit by the federal agents, her hands cuffed securely behind her back. DeAndre was following right behind her, his head bowed in total defeat. Patricia was completely, utterly alone. The family she had manipulated and weaponized to serve her own ego had been dismantled. The golden child was going to a federal holding cell. The wealthy son-in-law was facing absolute financial ruin. And the scapegoat, the daughter she had thrown away, was standing tall behind a podium, holding the keys to an empire she could never touch. She looked back at me one last time, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and profound despair. But I had nothing left to say to her. The silence in the room was my final verdict. But Jasmine was not finished. Even with the federal agents surrounding her, she refused to accept the reality of her own destruction. She violently jerked her shoulders, twisting away from the agent who was trying to secure her handcuffs. The sudden movement caught him off guard just long enough for her to break free. She lunged toward the stage, her face twisted into a mask of pure desperation. She scrambled up the short flight of stairs, ignoring the fact that her expensive silk dress was tearing at the hem. "You set us up!" she screamed, her voice cracking as she pointed a trembling finger at me. "Those digital files you sent to the board of directors are fake. You hacked our personal accounts. You manufactured those numbers to make us look guilty, but you cannot prove anything in a real court of law." I looked down at her. She was clinging to the edge of the clear acrylic podium like a drowning woman desperately searching for a life raft. "I did not need to hack anything, Jasmine," I said, my voice perfectly calm and measured. I reached onto the lower shelf of the podium and pulled out a secondary folder. This one was not a thin manila envelope. It was a thick, heavy binder bound in black leather. It contained the physical master copies of the forensic audit. I lifted it high enough for the entire room to see before I dropped it directly onto the transparent table. The heavy thud echoed through the microphone, making Jasmine physically flinch. "Let us look at the certified evidence," I stated, opening the heavy cover. Because the digital files were just the executive summary. "These are the certified bank records signed and notarized by the Chief Financial Officer of the Cayman Islands Trust you thought was completely untraceable. It shows the exact internet protocol addresses you used when you authorized the transfers from the company charity fund to DeAndre's illegal sports betting syndicate. Jasmine stared at the massive stack of financial records. The embossed seals of the international banks and the official stamps of the federal auditors stared back at her, proving that her crimes were meticulously documented. I turned the page, my movements slow and deliberate. Here are the routing numbers Mom used to wire money from the Affordable Housing Initiative directly to her personal checking account. The dates of the withdrawals match the exact dates of her luxury shopping trips to Rome and Paris over the last 3 years. And here are the vehicle identification numbers for the 3 sports cars you leased under the guise of corporate company vehicles. You used money meant for underprivileged families to upgrade your leather seats, Jasmine. No! She shrieked, throwing her hands over her ears as if blocking out my words would somehow make the evidence disappear. You forged them. You paid someone to make these up. It is a lie. You are trying to frame us because you are jealous. She lunged forward, throwing her upper body across the podium to physically snatch the folders away from me. Her manicured nails scraped loudly against the acrylic surface. She managed to grab the top stack of certified bank statements, ripping several thick pages in half in a frantic, wild attempt to destroy the physical evidence. She was panting, her eyes wide with a feral panic, shredding the papers and throwing them onto the floor. But before she could grab the rest of the binder, the 2 federal agents were on the stage. They grabbed her by the shoulders and forcefully pulled her back. She thrashed wildly, kicking her heels and screaming obscenities, but they expertly pinned her arms behind her back and finally snapped the heavy steel handcuffs around her wrists. The sharp metallic click signaled the absolute end of her freedom. "Let me go!" she sobbed, her voice muffled as an agent marched her down the stairs. "I am the majority shareholder. I am the chief executive officer. You work for me. You cannot do this." The absolute delusion was almost tragic to witness. DeAndre watched his wife completely lose her mind, and he just lowered his head, staring at the floor in silent, agonizing defeat. He made no move to help her. He knew the paper trail sitting on that podium was undeniable. He knew they were both going to federal prison. Patricia, seeing Jasmine officially in handcuffs, let out a piercing wail from the front row. She rushed toward the center aisle, but another agent stepped directly into her path, holding up a firm hand. "Ma'am, step back," the agent warned, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. Patricia ignored him. She looked past the agent and stared up at me, tears streaming down her ruined makeup. "Naomi, you cannot do this," she begged, her voice trembling with a mixture of terror and lingering arrogance. "Who gave you this information? Who helped you build this elaborate lie? You could not have gotten offshore banking records on your own. You do not have the security clearance or the political connections. Someone put you up to this. Who is funding you?" She was desperately grasping at straws, trying to find a scapegoat. She was trying to blame anyone else for the massive trap they had willingly walked into. In her narcissistic mind, she still could not fathom that the daughter she had dismissed, neglected, and discarded had outmaneuvered her so completely. She needed to believe there was some powerful shadow backer pulling the strings, because accepting that I had beaten her on my own was a psychological impossibility for her. She was right about one thing, though. I did have a backer, but he was not a shadow, and he was certainly not part of a lie. I looked past Patricia, past the federal agents, and focused my gaze entirely on the back of the grand ballroom. The heavy mahogany doors had been shut by the security team to keep the hotel staff and the press out of the room. "You want to know who is funding me, Mom?" I asked, my voice ringing clear and absolute through the massive room. "You want to know who owns the other 51% of this empire? You want to know who handed the Federal Bureau of Investigation the exact account numbers you used to steal from my company?" The entire ballroom fell so silent that the only sound was Jasmine quietly sobbing in the corner. Every single guest, every investor, and every family member turned their heads to look toward the back of the room, following my gaze. Right on cue, the grand ballroom doors violently swung open. They did not just open, they crashed against the wall stops with a thunderous, deafening boom that made every single person in the room jump. The heavy brass handles rattled against the wood as the true architect of their downfall finally stepped out of the shadows and into the brilliant light of the crystal chandeliers. The men who walked through those heavy mahogany doors were not hotel security, and they were not part of the event staff. The first man to step into the bright light of the ballroom was the special agent in charge of the Atlanta field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Flanking him were two more armed federal agents wearing tactical vests over their suits, and a senior federal prosecutor carrying a thick leather briefcase. And walking right behind them, radiating an aura of absolute old-world authority, was a tall, silver-haired man in a bespoke charcoal suit. Jasmine, even with her wrists securely bound in heavy steel handcuffs, let out a sharp, desperate laugh. Her mind was so completely fractured by the sudden collapse of her reality that she actually thought these new arrivals were top-tier defense attorneys DeAndre had somehow called in to save them. She looked at the senior federal prosecutor, and a smug, arrogant smirk spread across her tear-stained face. "It is about time you got here," Jasmine yelled, her voice echoing shrilly across the silent ballroom. "Tell these agents to take these cuffs off me right now. Arrest Naomi. She is the one committing corporate fraud. She just admitted to bankrupting our company and hiding the assets. We are the majority owners. We have the paperwork to prove it." The special agent in charge completely ignored her. He did not even glance in her direction. He walked straight up to DeAndre, who was still staring blankly at the shredded forged documents resting on his expensive Italian leather shoes. DeAndre, the special agent, said, his voice carrying the heavy, uncompromising weight of the United States government. "You are officially under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, bank fraud, and interstate embezzlement." The agent turned to Jasmine, who was suddenly struggling against the cuffs again. Her smug smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. "And you are under arrest as a co-conspirator," the agent continued, his tone completely devoid of sympathy. "You thought transferring the charity funds to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands would hide your tracks. But you used a routing server located in Miami, Florida, to execute the transaction." The agent paused, letting the severe geographical reality sink into their panicked minds. The moment that stolen money crossed state lines from Georgia to Florida, before bouncing to the Caribbean, it stopped being a local civil dispute. It became a federal crime. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has been tracking every single cent you stole for the last 6 months. Absolute panic finally set into the villains. The delusional armor Jasmine had been wearing completely dissolved. She was not going to a local precinct where she could post bail and sleep in her own custom king-sized bed. She was going to a federal holding facility. She let out a loud guttural wail and collapsed to her knees on the cold marble floor, sobbing hysterically while the agents stood over her. But the financial mechanics of their arrest were only a fraction of the nightmare I had prepared for them. The true devastation was standing right behind the federal agents. Patricia was staring at the tall, silver-haired man. Her brow was furrowed in deep confusion. She took a tentative step forward, her eyes scanning his aristocratic features. There was a flicker of recognition in her eyes, a buried memory desperately trying to claw its way to the surface, but she could not quite place him. "Who are you?" Patricia demanded, her voice shaking as she pointed a trembling finger at him. "Why are you doing this to my family?" The man did not answer her immediately. He walked to the edge of the stage and looked up at me. A warm, genuine smile broke across his stern face. It was the exact same comforting smile he had given me 2 decades ago when I was a terrified 12-year-old girl who thought the entire world had abandoned her. "You handled this brilliantly, Naomi," he said, his voice carrying a rich, thick Spanish accent that resonated beautifully through the quiet room. "I told you they would eventually hang themselves if you just gave them enough rope." "Thank you, Mateo," I replied, returning his smile. "I could not have built the gallows without your help." I turned back to the audience and then looked directly at my mother. "Patricia, let me introduce you to the man who owns the other 51% of my holding company." This is Matteo Navarro. He is currently a senior diplomat representing the European Union, but you might remember him differently. Patricia stared at him, the color completely draining from her face. Her breathing stopped, making her chest freeze mid-inhale. Matteo stepped forward, standing so close to Patricia that she had to crane her neck to look up at him. He looked down at her with an expression of such profound disgust that it made her physically shrink away from him. "It has been 23 years," Patricia Matteo said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register, "but I have a very good memory. The last time we spoke, you were sitting in an interrogation room at Charles de Gaulle Airport. You were wearing a white silk scarf, and you were furious that the airport police had pulled you off your connecting flight to Milan." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. The wealthy guests finally connected the dots. This was the stranger. This was the man who had found me abandoned at the airport and changed the entire trajectory of my life. "No," Patricia whispered, shaking her head frantically. "No, it cannot be. That is impossible." Matteo ignored her desperate denial. "You told the French authorities that leaving your 12-year-old daughter alone in a foreign country was just a simple misunderstanding." He continued, his words striking her like physical blows. "You played the victim perfectly. But when the police officers left the room to get you a glass of water, you leaned over to your husband and whispered something I have never forgotten." Matteo paused, making sure the entire ballroom was hanging on his every word. "You said she is just a difficult child and we did not want her ruining our trip," Matteo repeated, quoting the exact phrase Patricia had used all those years ago. "You did not know that the Spanish diplomat sitting in the corner of the room spoke perfect English. You did not know that I heard exactly how little you valued the incredible girl you had brought into this world." Patricia covered her mouth with both hands, tears streaming down her ruined makeup. She was utterly trapped by her own past. There was nowhere left to run, and no one left to lie to. "I watched you walk out of that airport with Naomi Matteo," said his voice filled with a cold, righteous anger. "I watched you yank her by the arm and scold her for causing a scene. And I made a promise to myself that day. I promised that I would keep an eye on that brilliant, resilient little girl. I promised that if she ever needed a lifeline, I would be there to provide it." Matteo turned to face the audience, addressing the hundreds of wealthy investors who had been duped by Patricia for years. "I am not just an angel investor," he announced proudly. "I am the man who hired the private investigators to track DeAndre's gambling debts. I am the man who handed the federal prosecutors the offshore banking records. I funded Naomi's first company because I knew she had the brilliance to succeed, and I knew her toxic family would eventually try to steal everything from her." He turned his attention back to Patricia, who was swaying slightly on her feet, looking like she was about to faint from the sheer public humiliation. "You told the police she was a difficult child," Matteo said, his voice echoing with absolute finality. "You threw her away because she was an inconvenience to your selfish lifestyle. But look at her now, Patricia. Look at the empire she built while you were busy pretending to be a decent mother. She is not a difficult child. She is a titan, and you are nothing but a criminal standing in her shadow." The absolute silence that followed Matteo Navarro's declaration was deafening. The heavy weight of his words hung in the air, pressing down on Patricia, until she looked like she might physically collapse. Then a wave of hushed whispers swept through the grand ballroom. The corporate titans, the federal judges, and the venture capitalists in the room were not just staring at him because of his dramatic speech. They were staring at him because they finally recognized exactly who was standing in front of them. Matteo was not just a senior diplomat. He was the former Spanish Minister of Economy and the current chairman of a massive European sovereign wealth fund. He was a man who moved global markets with a single phone call. He was a billionaire whose face occasionally graced the cover of international financial magazines. DeAndre, staring at Matteo, felt his knees practically buckle. The arrogant bullying posture he had maintained all evening vanished completely. "You," DeAndre whispered, his voice hollow and raspy, barely carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "You are the European Holding Company." Mateo turned his piercing gaze toward DeAndre. His expression was one of absolute unyielding disdain. "I am Mateo," confirmed, adjusting his tailored charcoal suit jacket. "When Naomi came to me 5 years ago with a brilliant business plan and a request for seed capital, I did not hesitate. I knew her work ethic. I knew her brilliance. But I also knew exactly who her family was." Mateo took a slow, measured step toward DeAndre. "I knew the moment her firm became profitable, her mother and her sister would try to bleed her dry. I knew you would eventually try to execute a hostile takeover. So I insisted on taking a 51% controlling interest on paper. We placed the shares in an irrevocable trust based in Geneva. It was designed specifically as an impenetrable fortress against greedy, incompetent parasites, exactly like you." Jasmine, struggling violently in her handcuffs, tried to push her way forward. Her expensive silk dress was torn, and her makeup was smeared across her face, making her look completely deranged. "You cannot do this," she shrieked, looking wildly at Mateo. "You are a diplomat. You have diplomatic immunity, but you cannot just give our company to her. She stole it from us. We are her family. You have to give us our share. We are entitled to that money." Mateo looked down at Jasmine as if she were a toxic spill on the expensive marble floor. "Your share?" Mateo repeated, his voice dangerously soft, but carrying a lethal edge. "You contributed absolutely nothing to this empire. You spent your entire life mocking your sister while she built a legacy out of the trauma your mother created. The only thing you are entitled to tonight is a federal indictment and a very long prison sentence." The senior federal prosecutor who had walked in with the agent stepped forward, opening his thick leather briefcase. He pulled out a stack of documents that mirrored the heavy binder currently sitting on my clear acrylic podium. "Mr. Navarro provided our office with the complete forensic audit of the Cayman Islands accounts," the prosecutor announced, his voice projecting absolute legal authority. "We have already frozen the offshore accounts. We have also placed immediate federal tax liens on your primary residence, the luxury vehicles you leased through the stolen charity funds, and the entirety of your personal trust fund." DeAndre let out a sound that was less of a cry and more of a wounded animal gasping for air. The federal liens meant he had absolutely zero capital left to hire a high-powered defense attorney. He was going to face a complex federal wire fraud and money laundering trial with a public defender. He slowly sank to his knees right there on the stage, the reality of his total financial annihilation crushing whatever was left of his pride. Patricia stood trembling, her hands clutching her pearl necklace so tightly the string looked ready to snap. She looked back and forth between me and Mateo. Her carefully constructed universe, where she was the center of attention and the source of all my success, had completely collapsed. She realized that I had never needed her. She realized that I had found a mentor, a protector, and a true parent in a stranger at an airport while she was busy pretending to be a mother for the cameras. "You planned this from the beginning," Patricia choked out, her eyes darting frantically around the room looking for anyone who might pity her. "You set us up to be arrested in front of all these people. You wanted to ruin me. You wanted to destroy our family name." I stepped down from the podium and walked until I was standing right beside Mateo. "I did not set you up, Mom," I replied, my voice echoing with quiet, absolute certainty. "I simply stopped protecting you from the consequences of your own actions. You forged corporate documents. You embezzled charity funds meant for underprivileged families. I just made sure the right people were watching when you finally decided to pull the trigger." Mateo placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. It was a gesture of genuine parental pride, something I had never once received from the woman standing a few feet away. He taught me how to read balance sheets when I was 20 years old. He taught me how to negotiate commercial leases. But most importantly, he taught me that shared DNA does not equal loyalty. "She has operated with nothing but integrity," Mateo stated, addressing the entire ballroom, but keeping his eyes locked on Patricia. "She gave you every opportunity to walk away tonight. When you approached the podium, she explicitly asked you if DeAndre had reviewed the documents. She gave you a chance to stop, but your greed was louder than your common sense." The crowd murmured in loud agreement. They had all heard me warn Jasmine and Patricia. They had all watched my family arrogantly dismiss the warning and double down on their blatant theft. There was absolutely no sympathy left in the room. The high society elite of Atlanta are ruthless when it comes to financial fraud. Patricia had stolen from a charity fund that many of the people sitting at those tables had personally contributed to. She was socially and financially dead to them. Several prominent investors sitting in the front rows intentionally turned their chairs around, turning their backs to Patricia, in a synchronized display of absolute rejection. The special agent in charge checked his watch and signaled to his tactical team. "Get them out of here," he ordered, his tone brisk and professional. "We have enough evidence to process them for violating Title 18 United States Code Section 1343. The agents grabbed DeAndre by the arms, pulling his dead weight up from the floor. He did not fight them. He let his head hang limp, completely broken and defeated. Jasmine, however, was still thrashing, screaming my name and cursing me as the agents forcefully dragged her toward the exit. The heavy mahogany doors remained wide open as the federal authorities marched my sister and my brother-in-law out of the ballroom and into the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers, waiting in the hotel valet loop. Patricia watched her golden child being hauled away like a common thief. She reached out a trembling hand toward the doors, but she could not force her legs to move. She was paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of her failure. I stood next to Mateo and watched them disappear down the brightly lit hallway, feeling an overwhelming sense of lightness wash over my chest. The heavy, suffocating weight of my toxic family, the constant fear of their sabotage, and the endless cycle of their manipulation was finally gone. They had dug their own graves, they had jumped in willingly, and I had simply handed the shovels to the federal government. Mateo turned away from the open doorway and focused his attention entirely on Patricia. She was still standing frozen near the front row of tables, looking like a woman who had just watched her entire universe collapse into dust. She was breathing in shallow, ragged gasps, unable to tear her eyes away from the man who had just orchestrated the absolute destruction of her family. For 23 years, Patricia Mateo began, his voice echoing with a cold, clinical precision that commanded absolute silence in the grand ballroom. For 23 years, I have known exactly what kind of people lived inside your house. You thought your little incident in Paris was a secret. You thought you could simply return to Atlanta and continue playing the role of the perfect matriarch. But when I put your daughter on a flight back to the United States 2 decades ago, I did not just wave goodbye and forget about her. Patricia swallowed hard, taking a small, involuntary step backward. I assigned a dedicated team from my corporate intelligence division to monitor her environment, Mateo stated. The wealthy guests in the room leaned forward, hanging on every word. I needed to ensure she was safe from the very people who were supposed to protect her, so I watched. My legal team kept meticulous records of your behavior. I saw the high school graduations you conveniently missed because you had a country club luncheon. I saw you refuse to co-sign her college student loans while you were simultaneously buying Jasmine designer clothes and luxury vacations. I stood beside Mateo, feeling a tightness in my chest finally begin to unravel. For my entire life, I had carried the burden of my family's emotional abuse in total silence. I thought I was completely alone navigating a household built on favoritism and cruelty. Hearing Mateo lay it all out in front of the people Patricia had spent years trying to impress was the ultimate validation. You starved her of affection, and you starved her of resources. Mateo continued, taking a slow, deliberate step toward the edge of the stage. But pressure creates diamonds, Patricia. You tried to bury her, but you only taught her how to survive in the dark. By the time she was 20 years old, she had more business acumen and pure resilience than you and your golden child could acquire in 10 lifetimes. Patricia shook her head, her perfectly styled hair falling loose around her face. You had no right, she whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. You had no right to spy on my family. I had every right to protect an investment, Mateo countered smoothly. When Naomi drafted her first comprehensive business plan, she submitted it to a blind European venture capital competition. She did not know my firm sponsored it. She won first place against thousands of international applicants. She earned her seed capital entirely on her own merit. All I did was make sure the check cleared through an anonymous corporate proxy so your greedy hands would not try to snatch it away from her. I remained a silent partner watching her build this massive empire brick by brick while you sat on the sidelines and took the credit. The investors in the audience nodded quietly to each other. The pieces were finally falling perfectly into place. They understood now why my firm had always operated with such flawless international backing and why I had always kept my family strictly separated from my actual corporate governance. But then your spectacularly incompetent son-in-law entered the picture. Matteo said, a sharp edge of disgust entering his tone. DeAndre is a remarkably arrogant man, but he is a terrible criminal. He thought he was the smartest person in the room. He thought he could outsmart the system because he wore a nice suit and spoke with unearned confidence. Matteo looked directly at the senior federal prosecutor who was still standing near the entrance organizing the physical evidence. My holding company monitors global capital flows, Matteo explained, turning back to Patricia and the crowd. We track sovereign wealth and international market shifts. So when DeAndre started siphoning money out of this company's charity accounts 6 months ago, it triggered every single compliance alarm in my Geneva office. It was amateur hour. DeAndre was funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars through basic shell corporations in Florida before dumping the cash into unregulated sports betting syndicates in the Caribbean. Patricia looked sick. The sheer scale of the surveillance, the realization that an international billionaire had been tracking their every move while they arrogantly plotted to steal my company, was too much for her mind to process. He thought he was being stealthy, routing the wire transfers through Miami. Matteo laughed a cold, harsh sound. But my financial analysts track cartel money laundering operations for sport. Finding DeAndre's stolen charity funds took my team less than 48 hours. We traced every single cent right back to the internet protocol addresses registered to your personal home network, Patricia. I watched my mother physically shrink. The aristocratic posture she had maintained for decades was gone. She was just a small, terrified woman facing the devastating consequences of her own boundless greed. I did not just tip off the authorities, Matteo announced, his voice rising with absolute authority. I invited the senior federal prosecutor to my private office. I handed the United States government a perfectly categorized bound dossier. We provided them with every IP address, every forged signature, every offshore bank routing number, and every single text message Jasmine sent complaining about the international transfer limits. I handed the Federal Bureau of Investigation a bulletproof indictment wrapped in a silver bow. The ballroom was dead silent. The absolute power and reach of the man standing beside me was undeniable. He had completely outmaneuvered a family of narcissists without ever stepping foot in their city until the trap was perfectly sprung. And do you know why I did it? Patricia Matteo asked, leaning forward slightly. I did it because of what you said in Paris. You called her a difficult child. You threw her away because she inconvenienced you. I wanted you to see exactly what that difficult child became. I wanted you to stand in this room surrounded by your peers and watch your golden child get hauled away in handcuffs. I wanted you to realize that you destroyed your own life trying to steal hers. Patricia could not hold his gaze. She looked down at the marble floor, tears dripping from her chin. She had spent her entire life curating an image of perfection, and now she was publicly exposed as an abusive mother and a corporate fraud. You tried to use the concept of family as a weapon, Matteo concluded, his voice dropping to a quiet, lethal register. But family is not defined by blood, Patricia. It is defined by loyalty, by protection, and by unconditional support. You failed at all three. Naomi is my family now, and I protect my family. Matteo turned his back on her, dismissing her entirely. It was the ultimate insult to a narcissist. He completely removed his attention, signaling that she was no longer worth his time or his words. He walked back to my side, standing tall and unbothered as the remaining federal agents began packing up the shredded forged documents to use as physical evidence in the upcoming trial. The past and the present had finally collided, and the truth had burned the facade to the ground. But Patricia could not accept being dismissed. For a narcissist, being ignored is a fate far worse than being hated. Being deprived of attention is the equivalent of being deprived of oxygen. As Mateo turned his back to her and began speaking quietly with the senior federal prosecutor, Patricia's mind scrambled for a new survival strategy. The rage and the tears had failed. The intimidation had failed. So she reached into the very bottom of her manipulative toolkit and pulled out the only weapon she had left. She tried to charm him. Patricia smoothed down the front of her expensive designer dress. She wiped the smeared mascara from under her eyes with the back of her hand and took a deep breath, forcing her facial features into a mask of polite, aristocratic grace. It was the exact same face she wore to charity galas and high society luncheons when she wanted to secure a massive donation. She stepped forward and intentionally placed herself directly in Mateo Navarro's line of sight, forcing him to acknowledge her. "Mr. Navarro." Patricia said, her voice suddenly soft and melodic, dripping with a sickeningly sweet tone. "Please forgive my earlier outburst. This entire evening has been incredibly overwhelming. I am just a mother who has been terribly manipulated by her own son-in-law." Mateo stopped speaking to the prosecutor. He slowly turned his head and looked at Patricia. He did not say a word. He just stared at her, waiting to see exactly how deep she was willing to dig her own grave. "DeAndre is a very aggressive man," Patricia continued, stepping slightly closer to him and lowering her voice as if they were two old friends sharing a private secret. "He told me those documents were simply administrative." "I am not a lawyer, Mr. Navarro. I am a widow who trusted the man my eldest daughter married. Jasmine has always been easily influenced, and DeAndre took advantage of both of us. But you and I, we are people of the world. We understand how these unfortunate misunderstandings happen in business." I stood a few feet away, watching my mother effortlessly throw her favorite golden child entirely under the bus to save her own skin. Less than 5 minutes ago, she had been weeping for Jasmine. Now she was painting Jasmine as a weak-minded fool and DeAndre as a master manipulator, hoping Mateo would view her as a tragic victim. "You have incredible influence," Patricia purred, offering Mateo a small, trembling smile. "You could speak to these federal agents. You could explain that I was coerced. I have deep connections in this city, Mr. Navarro. I sit on the board of the local hospital. I am close personal friends with 2 state senators. If you help me clear up this little misunderstanding, I could introduce you to the right circles in Atlanta. We could be powerful allies. After all, Naomi is my blood. We are family, and family must stick together." Mateo looked at her outstretched hand. He did not take it. Instead, he let out a short, humorless laugh that cut through her fake charm like a scalpel. "Allies." Mateo repeated the word, tasting like poison in his mouth. "You think you have something to offer me, Patricia? You think your little country club memberships and your local politicians impress a man who advises sovereign nations on international trade. You are a big fish in a remarkably small puddle, and you have spent your entire life believing your own delusions of grandeur." Patricia dropped her hand, her polite smile faltering. "Mr. Navarro, I am only trying to find a reasonable solution." "There is no solution," Mateo said, his voice turning to absolute ice. "You did not sign those papers because you were confused. You signed them because you are greedy. You did not wire hundreds of thousands of dollars from a charity fund to a Cayman Islands account because DeAndre manipulated you. You did it because you felt entitled to money you did not earn. You are not a victim, Patricia. You are the architect of your own destruction." Mateo took one step closer to her, his height and presence completely dominating her physical space. "You stand here tonight trying to charm me, using the concept of family to save yourself. But you lost the right to use that word 23 years ago. You lost it the moment you decided a 12-year-old girl was disposable. You lost it the moment you tried to steal her empire today. Patricia opened her mouth to argue to spin another web of lies, but Mateo raised a single hand, silencing her instantly. I told you exactly what she is, Mateo said, his voice echoing across the ballroom, ensuring every single guest heard his final verdict. She is a titan. She built a fortress while you were busy playing dress-up, and now you have absolutely nothing left. Mateo stepped aside, clearing the path. The special agent in charge, who had been standing quietly behind us, finally stepped forward. He did not have the patience for high society drama. He had a federal warrant to execute, and he was ready to finish the job. Patricia Ann, he said, his voice loud and authoritative. He did not use her prestigious last name. He stripped her of her title right out of the gate. You are under arrest for violation of Title 18 United States Code Section 1956, money laundering, and Section 1343 wire fraud. Patricia froze. Her eyes darted wildly from the federal agent to Mateo, and finally to me. No, she gasped, her voice completely losing its melodic charm. No, you already took DeAndre. You already took Jasmine. You cannot take me. I am a respected member of this community. I am a philanthropist. You are a thief, the federal agent corrected bluntly, reaching to the back of his belt. And the community you claim to respect is sitting in this room watching you go to jail. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back. Patricia backed away, shaking her head violently. Naomi, she screamed, her voice cracking. Naomi, tell them to stop. Tell them I am your mother. You cannot let them do this to me. I will be ruined. I will never be able to show my face in this city again. I looked at the woman who had tormented me for 3 decades. I looked at the woman who had made me feel worthless, unlovable, and invisible. I felt no pity. I felt no sadness. I only felt a profound, overwhelming sense of peace. You ruined yourself, Mom, I said quietly but firmly. I am just letting you experience the consequences. The federal agent stepped forward and grabbed Patricia by the left arm. She tried to pull away, but he expertly twisted her wrist behind her back. Another agent stepped up and grabbed her right arm, securing it alongside the left. Patricia struggled, twisting her shoulders in a frantic attempt to escape. Get your hands off me, she shrieked, her voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. Do you know who I am? I will have your badge. I will sue this entire department. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs snapping shut around her wrists echoed through the microphone. The sound was final and absolute. As the agent secured the cuffs, Patricia jerked forward. The sudden, violent movement caught the string of her expensive pearl necklace on the lapel of the agent's suit jacket. The heavy silk thread snapped. Dozens of perfectly round white pearls scattered across the stage, bouncing on the clear acrylic floor and rolling off the edges into the darkness. It was a perfect visual metaphor for her entire life. The beautiful, expensive facade she had spent decades carefully stringing together was completely broken, scattering into worthless pieces on the floor. Patricia looked down at the pearls rolling away from her feet. The fight completely drained out of her body. Her shoulders slumped, her chin fell to her chest, and a low, agonizing sob tore from her throat. She was no longer a wealthy socialite. She was just a broken criminal wearing steel bracelets. The agents did not give her time to mourn her jewelry. They turned her around and marched her toward the center aisle of the ballroom. The 300 guests, the people Patricia had spent her entire life desperately trying to impress, sat in total silence as she was paraded past their tables. Not a single person offered her a word of comfort. Not a single person stood up to defend her. They watched her with cold, judging eyes, witnessing the absolute downfall of a narcissist. I stood behind the podium and watched the heavy mahogany doors close behind her. The flashing red and blue lights from the lobby faded into the distance. The poison had finally been extracted from my life. I took a deep breath of the cool, conditioned air, feeling the heavy, invisible weight I had carried since childhood completely lift from my shoulders. The gala was not over. In fact, my real life was just beginning. Even before the heavy mahogany doors had fully closed on my mother, The reality of what had just happened on that stage was still burning in the air. To truly understand the depth of their depravity, you have to understand exactly what happened between my sister and her husband the moment the steel handcuffs snapped shut around their wrists. I watched the entire exchange unfold from behind my acrylic podium, and it was the most pathetic display of cowardice I have ever witnessed in my entire life. When the federal agents first moved in to secure DeAndre, he did not act like a devoted husband. He did not ask if his wife was okay or try to comfort her. The second the cold metal touched his skin, his absolute survival instinct took over. The arrogant, booming alpha male persona he had projected all evening completely evaporated. He instantly transformed into a desperate, cornered rat, willing to chew off his own limbs to escape the trap. "I want a deal," DeAndre shouted, his voice echoing frantically across the ballroom, while the special agent patted him down for weapons. "I want full immunity. I can give you everything on the Cayman Islands accounts. I can give you the passwords and the encrypted ledgers." The special agent did not stop his search. He simply raised an eyebrow, looking at DeAndre with utter professional contempt. "You are in no position to negotiate a deal right now," the agent replied, his tone flat and unyielding. "I was just a pawn," DeAndre pleaded, twisting his neck to look frantically at the senior federal prosecutor standing nearby. He pointed a trembling finger directly at his wife. "She was the mastermind. Jasmine is the one who stole the charity funds. It was all her idea." Jasmine, who had been thrashing against the grip of another agent, suddenly froze. The tears of panic streaming down her face stopped, instantly replaced by a look of profound shock. She stared at her husband, the man she had conspired with to ruin my life, completely unable to comprehend what he had just done. The golden child facade, the illusion of their perfect, wealthy marriage, shattered into a million irreparable pieces right there on the gala floor. "I did not authorize those transfers," DeAndre continued, his voice rising in a desperate pitch. "Jasmine had the access codes to the company accounts. She forged the signatures on the wire transfers. She manipulated me into filing the power of attorney today because she was furious that Naomi was more successful than her. She told me Naomi was stealing from the family trust. She told me we had a legal right to take the company. I just filed the paperwork. I am a victim of her manipulation. I will testify against her in federal court today if you let me go." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. The 300 guests, the wealthy elite of Atlanta, were watching a marriage implode in real time. They were witnessing the true nature of toxic relationships. Toxic families do not have loyalty. They only have alliances of convenience built on shared greed and shared victims. The very second that alliance is threatened, they will tear each other apart without a single moment of hesitation. Jasmine let out a sound that I can only describe as feral. It was a high-pitched screech of pure, unadulterated rage. "You spineless, pathetic coward!" Jasmine shrieked, her voice tearing through the room. She lunged at him, her hands cuffed behind her back, looking like a wild animal completely untethered from reality. The federal agent holding her had to plant his feet firmly to keep her from physically throwing herself at DeAndre. "You think they are going to believe you?" Jasmine spat, her face contorted with fury. "You owe over $1 million to violent criminals. You begged me to help you steal the charity money because the men you owe threatened to come to our house. You cried on our kitchen floor begging me to save your life." She turned her head, addressing the federal agents and the prosecutor. Her eyes were wide and frantic, a woman realizing she was going down and deciding to drag everyone into the abyss with her. "He has a burner phone hidden in his golf bag," Jasmine yelled, desperate to offer up better information than he did. "He uses it to place illegal offshore bets. He forged his own tax returns for the last 4 years. He does not even have a real job. He just steals from my trust fund to pretend he is a venture capitalist. I will tell you where he hides the cash." DeAndre's face turned a violent shade of red. "Shut your mouth, Jasmine," he roared, completely losing whatever tiny shred of composure he had left. "I will tell you everything," Jasmine screamed over him, determined to secure her own plea deal. He has a safe deposit box at the downtown bank branch registered under his cousin's name. That is where he put the initial wire transfers from the Affordable Housing Fund. He was planning to flee to Dubai if the corporate takeover failed today. He bought the plane tickets yesterday. The crowd let out a collective gasp. Fleeing the country was a massive escalation. DeAndre panicked, realizing she was handing the federal government every single piece of evidence they needed to put him away for decades. She is a pathological liar, DeAndre yelled, pulling against his handcuffs. She has a storage unit leased under her maiden name on the west side of the city. It is filled with the assets she bought using the embezzled money. Artworks, luxury watches, designer jewelry. She was hiding the assets from her own mother. She spent $200,000 of stolen charity money on a wardrobe makeover just last month. DeAndre sneered at her, his eyes filled with absolute venom. You wanted the company because you are nothing, Jasmine. You were embarrassed that your little sister is a self-made millionaire while you are nothing but a dependent who leeches off everyone around you. You could not even execute a simple document transfer correctly. You took a $4 million debt and put my name on it, Jasmine screamed back, tears of rage flying from her face. You ruined my life, you absolute failure. The sheer public shaming of this moment was unprecedented. A wealthy philanthropist sitting at table 4, a woman who had personally donated $50,000 to my company's affordable housing initiative, abruptly stood up. She walked right up to the edge of the stage, ignoring the federal agents. She looked at Jasmine with a cold, furious glare that could freeze boiling water. You bought luxury watches with money meant to build homes for underprivileged families, the philanthropist asked, her voice trembling with absolute outrage. You stole from the homeless to buy designer clothes. Jasmine stopped screaming. For the first time since the federal agents walked into the room, she genuinely shrank back. She could not look the philanthropist in the eye. The real public shaming, the absolute destruction of her social status, was finally settling in. She had lost her freedom, but standing under the harsh glare of the stage lights, she realized she had also lost the one thing she valued above all else: her reputation. She was no longer a respected member of Atlanta high society. She was a pariah, a thief who stole from the poor to fund her own vanity. I stood behind my podium and watched them tear each other apart right on the gala floor. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel sorry for my sister, and I certainly did not feel sorry for her husband. For my entire life, I had been told that family is a sacred bond. I had been gaslit into believing that Jasmine and Patricia shared a profound, unbreakable connection that I was simply too flawed to be a part of. But looking at my sister and my brother-in-law screaming obscenities at each other to save their own skin, I realized the absolute truth. Their bond was entirely fake. It was a fragile, paper-thin illusion held together by stolen money and a shared hatred of anyone who forced them to look in the mirror. And the moment the mirror was held up to them, the illusion violently collapsed. Enough, the special agent in charge barked, his voice cutting through their screaming match like a whip. He grabbed DeAndre by the collar of his expensive suit jacket and pulled him backward. We have all the confessions we need. Get them out of here. The federal agents forcefully turned DeAndre and Jasmine around. They did not go quietly. Even as they were marched down the center aisle of the grand ballroom, they continued to spit venom at each other, blaming one another for their absolute downfall. The 300 guests watched in stunned silence as the wealthy, glamorous couple was paraded out the doors, looking like nothing more than common criminals, turning on each other for a reduced sentence. I watched them disappear into the hallway, knowing I would never have to deal with their toxic presence in my life ever again. The surgical precision of my trap had not just exposed their crimes, it had completely dismantled their relationship. They were walking into a federal prison system where they would spend the next decade fighting each other in court. And I was going to stay right here, standing at the helm of the empire they had so desperately tried to steal. Just as the federal agents were about to push Patricia through the heavy mahogany doors and out into the brightly lit hotel lobby, she dug her heels into the polished marble floor. She threw her entire body weight backward, forcing the two agents to abruptly halt their momentum. Her designer heels skidded against the stone, leaving dark scuff marks on the pristine surface. She twisted her neck around her eyes wide and bloodshot, frantically searching the room, until her gaze locked onto me standing behind the acrylic podium. She had exhausted her rage. She had exhausted her charm. Now she was falling back on the final desperate weapon that toxic families always use when every other manipulation tactic has failed. The biological guilt trip. "Naomi, please!" Patricia screamed, her voice tearing through the silent ballroom. It was a raw, guttural sound completely devoid of the aristocratic elegance she had spent her entire life trying to project. "You have to pay our bail. You cannot let your sister go to a federal holding facility. You cannot let them lock me in a cell. We are your family, Naomi. We are blood." I looked at her. I did not flinch, and I did not look away. For 35 years, that word had been used as a weapon against me. Blood was the excuse they used to demand my obedience. Blood was the justification for their cruelty. Blood was the reason I was supposed to quietly accept being treated like a second-class citizen in my own home while they paraded around pretending to be royalty. I stepped out from behind the podium. I walked down the short flight of stairs to the main floor of the ballroom. I did not walk alone. Mateo Navarro stepped forward, falling perfectly into stride right beside me. And as I walked down the center aisle toward the back doors, the people sitting at the front tables stood up and joined us. My chief financial officer stepped into the aisle. The senior partners of my legal team stepped forward. Two of the federal judges who had mentored me early in my career stood up and flanked my right side. I was walking toward the woman who had given birth to me, but I was surrounded by the people who had actually helped me survive. My true peers, my chosen family. I stopped 10 feet away from Patricia. The federal agents tightened their grip on her arms, ready to drag her out, but I raised a single hand, asking for just one more moment. The agents paused, respecting the absolute authority I had commanded in that room. "We are blood." Patricia sobbed, her tears dripping onto the collar of her ruined dress. "You cannot do this to your own blood. Blood did not keep me warm in Paris." "Patricia," I said, my voice perfectly level, carrying clearly through the silent hallway. "Blood did not come looking for me when I was a 12-year-old girl shivering outside a foreign airport terminal. Blood did not pay for my first commercial real estate license. Blood did not stay up for 48 hours straight, reading corporate tax codes so I could build this company from nothing." Patricia shook her head violently, unable to accept the reality that her ultimate guilt trip was having absolutely zero effect on me. "You loved the idea of blood when it meant you could steal from my charity fund to pay for your luxury vacations." I continued, taking one deliberate step closer to her. "You loved the idea of blood when you thought it gave you the right to crash my birthday gala and forge documents to steal my empire. But the moment the Federal Bureau of Investigation walked through those doors, your loyalty to your blood disappeared." I just watched DeAndre try to sell Jasmine to the government for a reduced sentence. I just watched Jasmine try to send her own husband to prison to save herself. "Please, Naomi." Patricia begged, her voice dropping to a pathetic whisper. "I have nothing left. I do not have a lawyer. The government froze the bank accounts. Where am I supposed to go?" "You are going to a federal holding facility," I stated coldly. "And after that, you are going to face a federal judge. But let me be absolutely clear about your living situation. The luxury condominium you have been living in for the last 3 years, the one you bragged to all your country club friends about owning, is a corporate asset belonging to my firm. I allowed you to live there rent-free because I felt a lingering sense of obligation. That obligation died tonight." Patricia gasped, her eyes widening in absolute horror. "My corporate attorneys have already drafted the eviction notices," I explained, my words acting as the final nails in the coffin of her fake aristocratic life. "Tomorrow morning, my legal team will oversee the packing of your belongings." Your designer clothes, your shoes, and whatever is left of your jewelry will be boxed up and sent to a public storage unit in the industrial district. I will pay the rental fee for exactly 30 days. After that, it is the property of the facility. You cannot throw me out on the street, Patricia wailed, struggling weakly against the handcuffs. I am your mother. You lost the right to call yourself my mother. A very long time ago, I replied, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. You are just a woman who shares my DNA and tried to orchestrate my financial ruin. I will not pay a single cent toward your bail. I will not hire a defense attorney for you. I will not send you money in prison. I leaned in just slightly, ensuring she could see the absolute, unwavering finality in my eyes. This is the end of our relationship, Patricia. Do not call my office. Do not have a public defender reach out to my lawyers. Do not write me letters from your cell. Do not ever contact me again. I did not wait for her to respond. I did not want to hear another excuse, another lie, or another desperate manipulation. I had delivered my final ultimatum and set a boundary made of solid steel. I turned my back on her. For a narcissist, there is no greater punishment than the withdrawal of attention. They can handle hatred. They can handle anger. They can even handle public screaming matches because it means they are still the center of your universe. But they cannot handle absolute cold indifference. Turning my back on her was the ultimate psychological execution. No, Patricia screamed, her voice reaching a hysterical, shattering pitch. Naomi, look at me. Look at me. I did not look back. I did not even turn my head. I simply held out my arm, and Mateo Navarro immediately offered his. I looped my arm through his, feeling the warm, sturdy presence of the man who had been more of a father to me in one afternoon at a Paris airport than my own parents had been in my entire life. Take her away, the special agent in charge ordered, his voice cutting through Patricia's frantic screaming. The heavy mahogany doors finally slammed shut, with a thunderous, echoing boom, severing the sound of her voice completely. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was not tense. It was the deep, profound silence of a massive storm finally breaking, leaving the air clean and clear in its wake. I stood in the center aisle of the ballroom, surrounded by my board members, my legal team, and the wealthiest investors in Atlanta. They were all staring at me, but there was no pity in their eyes. There was only absolute, unadulterated respect. I had just dismantled a complex corporate fraud operation, neutralized a hostile takeover, and excised a toxic family unit from my life with flawless surgical precision. Mateo patted my hand where it rested on his arm. Shall we finish the evening? He asked, a warm, proud smile touching the corners of his mouth. We certainly shall, I replied. I let go of his arm and walked back up the center aisle. My heels clicked rhythmically against the marble floor, projecting an aura of total, unshakable confidence. I climbed the short flight of stairs, returning to the stage and stepping behind the clear acrylic podium. The shredded pieces of the forged power of attorney were still scattered on the floor nearby, but they looked like exactly what they were: meaningless pieces of trash. I reached up and adjusted the microphone. I looked out at the 300 guests sitting in the grand ballroom. The federal judges were watching me intently. The philanthropists who had been defrauded by my mother were sitting up straight, completely focused on my next words. I took a slow, deep breath. As I was saying before, we were so rudely interrupted, I began, my voice ringing crystal clear across the room, completely steady and free of any tremor. A low chuckle rippled through the front tables, breaking the lingering tension. Several of the corporate attorneys smiled, nodding their heads in appreciation of my absolute refusal to let the drama derail the event. Tonight is supposed to be a celebration of resilience, I continued, leaning forward slightly. This gala is about funding the Affordable Housing Initiative. It is about providing a safe, secure foundation for people who have had the ground ripped out from under them. And if there is one thing I deeply understand, it is the absolute necessity of a safe foundation. I looked at Mateo, who was standing near the front row, watching me with quiet pride. We often talk about building homes for the vulnerable, I said, my voice carrying a rich emotional depth that resonated through the massive room. But true shelter is not just about brick and mortar. It is about protection. It is about having a place where the people who are supposed to care for you do not exploit you. Many of the families our charity supports are running from toxic environments. They are running from abuse, manipulation, and financial control. They are trying to break cycles of generational trauma that have held them hostage for decades. The entire ballroom was hanging on my every word. The events that had just transpired on this very stage were no longer a scandalous family drama. I was weaving their arrests directly into the core mission of my life's work. I was turning my personal trauma into a masterclass on empowerment. When you donate to this fund tonight, you are not just building a physical house, I promised, looking directly into the eyes of the wealthiest donors in the city. You are building boundaries. You are giving someone the financial independence they need to stand up to the monsters in their own lives. You are giving them the power to look their abusers in the eye and say no more. You are giving them the freedom to walk away from the people who hold them down and walk toward the family they choose for themselves. I paused, letting the weight of my message settle over the crowd. I built my empire because someone gave me a lifeline when I was 12 years old. I concluded, my voice strong and unwavering. Now it is our turn to be that lifeline for someone else. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for your continued investments. And most importantly, thank you for helping me protect this house. I stepped back from the microphone. For a split second, there was total silence. And then a prominent federal judge sitting at the center table stood up. He brought his hands together, clapping slowly and loudly. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Immediately, the senior partner of the largest law firm in Atlanta stood up beside him and joined the applause. Then the philanthropists stood up. The venture capitalists, the socialites, the board members, they all rose to their feet. The sound swelled, rolling across the ballroom like a massive tidal wave until all 300 guests were standing. It was a roaring, thunderous standing ovation. The applause vibrated through the floorboards and shook the crystal chandeliers overhead. They were not just clapping for the charity initiative. They were applauding the sheer, unbreakable strength of a woman who had refused to be a victim. They were applauding the absolute destruction of a narcissistic facade and the triumph of truth over manipulation. I looked out at the sea of standing people, feeling a profound, overwhelming sense of liberation wash over my entire soul. The toxic poison that had infected my life since childhood had been completely surgically removed. The shadows that had haunted my past were gone, entirely eradicated by the bright, brilliant light of my present. I had survived the abandonment in Paris. I had survived the emotional abuse in Atlanta. I had survived the ultimate betrayal by my own blood. And standing there listening to the deafening roar of applause, I knew with absolute certainty that no one would ever be able to tear me down again. I had not just reclaimed my company, I had reclaimed my entire life. 6 months have passed since the heavy mahogany doors of the grand ballroom slammed shut behind my mother. The roaring applause from my investors that night still echoes in my memory, but the reality of my life today is defined by a profound, beautiful quiet. The constant undercurrent of anxiety, the walking on eggshells, and the endless anticipation of my family's next betrayal have all completely vanished. In their place is a thriving empire and the absolute certainty that I am finally safe. But while I have spent the last half year building homes for the vulnerable and expanding my corporate portfolio, my biological family has been busy tearing each other to shreds in the unforgiving machinery of the federal justice system. The United States Department of Justice does not care about high society pedigree, and they certainly do not care about family loyalty. The federal indictments were officially handed down less than 72 hours after the charity gala. DeAndre and Jasmine were charged with multiple counts of wire fraud conspiracy to commit money laundering and corporate espionage. Because the embezzlement crossed state lines and involved international banking servers, They were thrust into the highest tier of federal prosecution. The illusion of their perfect, wealthy marriage disintegrated instantly. Jasmine filed for divorce before she even made bail. She hired a ruthless discount divorce attorney with the last few $1,000s she could scrape together from a forgotten personal checking account. Her entire legal strategy consisted of playing the victim and publicly accusing DeAndre of coercing her into the embezzlement scheme. DeAndre retaliated with a level of viciousness that shocked even the tabloid reporters covering the trial. To save himself from a maximum sentence, he handed the federal prosecutors a hidden hard drive containing audio recordings of Jasmine explicitly planning the theft of the charity funds. In the recordings, my sister was captured laughing about using the affordable housing money to upgrade her luxury car lease and mocking the very families the charity was designed to protect. The recordings were leaked to the press. It was a media bloodbath. The Atlanta Business Chronicle and local news stations ran the audio clips on a relentless loop. The golden child, the sister who had spent her entire life hiding behind a carefully curated image of flawless superiority, became a spectacular public punchline. She was universally despised. Because they refused to cooperate with each other and actively committed perjury to spite one another during the initial hearings, the prosecutors pulled all potential plea deals off the table. They are now facing a grueling public trial where the mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines guarantee they will both spend the next decade in federal prison. The offshore bookies DeAndre owed money to realized they were never getting paid and anonymously leaked all of his illegal gambling ledgers to the Internal Revenue Service, ensuring that even if he ever gets out of prison, his wages will be garnished until the day he dies. Their downfall was loud, chaotic, and violently public. But Patricia's ruin was entirely different. Her destruction was silent, absolute, and pathetic. I kept the promise I made to her at the gala down to the very last letter. At 8 o'clock, the morning after her arrest, my corporate attorneys arrived at her luxury condominium, accompanied by a professional moving crew and local law enforcement. She was handed a formal eviction notice and given exactly 2 hours to gather her immediate personal necessities. She wept, she screamed, and she threatened to sue my firm, but the officers simply pointed to the door. Every piece of designer furniture, every expensive painting, and every scrap of high-end clothing she owned was packed into standard cardboard boxes and shipped to a climate-controlled public storage unit in an industrial park on the edge of the city. I paid the rental fee for exactly 30 days. On the 31st day, the storage facility assumed ownership of the contents to cover the unpaid balance. I do not know if she ever managed to retrieve her belongings, and I never bothered to ask. The financial bankruptcy hit her within weeks. Stripped of the corporate credit cards she had been secretly using, and completely cut off from the funds I had foolishly allowed her to access, she had absolutely no way to survive. But for a narcissist like Patricia, the loss of money was nothing compared to the loss of her social standing. Her reputation was the only oxygen she truly breathed, and I had permanently cut off her supply. The social exile was instantaneous and brutal. Atlanta elite society is incredibly small and incredibly unforgiving to anyone who embarrasses them. Patricia tried to maintain her illusions at first. A week after she made bail, she attempted to attend a weekly luncheon at the Piedmont Driving Club, acting as if the charity gala had just been a massive misunderstanding. She did not even make it past the front lobby. The club management had already formally revoked her membership. When she tried to argue, the general manager calmly informed her that several prominent members, including women she had considered her closest friends, explicitly stated they would cancel their own memberships if Patricia was ever allowed on the premises again. She was escorted off the property by security in broad daylight. The hospital board removed her name from their registry. Her phone calls to local politicians went straight to voicemail. The wealthy socialites who used to drink champagne in her living room completely blocked her number. She became radioactive. She is now living in a tiny, cramped apartment in a dilapidated building on the outskirts of the city, completely isolated and entirely alone. She has no audience left to perform for. She has no golden child to parade around. She has no scapegoat left to blame for her misery. She is trapped in a quiet, empty reality where the only person she has to look at is herself. And for a woman who has spent her entire life running from her own reflection, that is a punishment far worse than any prison cell. I watched the fallout from a distance, reading the legal briefings my attorneys forwarded to me with a detached clinical interest. I felt no guilt. I felt no lingering obligation. They had dug a massive pit intending to bury me in it so they could steal the empire I built with my own bare hands. I simply stepped aside and watched them fall in. Want to hear from you? Share your own stories in the comments below. Tell me how you found the strength to set your boundaries and walk away. Tell me about the beautiful chosen family you have built on the other side of the pain. Remember that walking away from toxicity is not giving up. It is the beautiful, empowering moment you finally decide to fight for yourself. Your story is still being written, and the best chapters are the ones where you are finally free.